Okay, so this video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to put all my videos together at once for a little bit of a mega mix, so if people want to listen to it while they're sleeping or something like that. I hope you enjoy. Overnights at Walmart. As I was stocking shelves in the grocery department of Walmart, I couldn't help but notice an elderly man lingering in the aisle next to me. He was staring intensely at a bottle of olive oil, muttering to himself. I walked into the next aisle and started stocking something. I heard the sound of something pouring. I went to go find out what it was. I looked down the aisle as the man grabbed another bottle of olive oil and unscrewed the cap and poured it over his head. My eyes widened in shock as he proclaimed loudly, "I am Jesus." I quickly ran over to stop him, but he held out his hand and said, "Do not be afraid, my child. The olive oil is my anointing." I was speechless, unsure of what to do next. The man stood there, drenched in oil, a serene smile on his face, as customers passing by stared in confusion, some even whispering to each other. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions, bewilderment, concern, a twinge of awe, as I tried to wrap my head around what just happened. The man calmly walked away, leaving a trail of oily footprints behind him. I stood there for a moment, processing the unexpected encounter. It was definitely a strange and surreal moment, one that I would never forget. And as I continued my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something truly insane. But there happened to be a nursing home next door, and we had this happen 4 more times before the man never came in again. My elderly neighbor. As I sat in the living room trying to relax after a long day of work, the incessant noise coming from my neighbor's apartment began to grate on my nerves. It was the old lady next door and her son always fighting, and it sounded like furniture being moved around, or something heavy being dropped repeatedly. I tried to drown it out with TV and music, but it always seemed to penetrate through the walls. But then one day I came home from work and the noise had suddenly stopped. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, thinking maybe my neighbors had moved out or something. But the relief quickly turned to unease as a foul, putrid smell started to permeate the hallway. It was so overwhelming I could barely stand it. I hesitantly knocked on the neighbor's door, but there was no answer. Instead, I heard strange scratching noises coming from inside. And as the smell grew stronger, I knew something was very wrong. I called the building manager, who called the police. When they finally broke the door down, what they found inside was beyond horrifying. My neighbor, a sweet old lady who I exchanged pleasantries with in the hall, lay dead on the floor of her bedroom. Her body had been mutilated. Her cats were huddled in the corner looking terrified. It turned out her son, who had been living with her, had snapped, killed her in a fit of rage. He had trapped the poor cats in the room with their deceased owner, leaving them to fend for themselves. They had to resort to eating her to survive. I was left reeling from the realization that the horror had been happening right next door to me, without my knowledge. The scratching sounds I heard were the desperate cries for help from those poor animals, and now I couldn't shake the guilt of not doing something sooner. I couldn't help but wonder how many more dark secrets lay behind these closed doors of this building, and I vowed to be more vigilant and attentive to the surroundings from now on, because you never know what horrors may be lurking just a few feet away. Highway of Horror. I was driving down the highway, minding my own business, when I noticed a car behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but then they started tailgating me and honking their horn. I tried to speed up to lose them, but they stayed right on my tail. I started to get a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. As the car continued to follow me, swerving dangerously close to my car, I could hear the engine revving, and I knew they were trying to run me off the road. They slammed into the back of my car and kept flashing their lights. Panic set in when I realized I needed to do something to get away from this dangerous driver. I quickly took an exit off the highway, hoping to lose them in the twists and turns of side streets. But they were relentless and stayed right on my tail. I went down the maze of side streets until I didn't even know where we had come from. I knew my only chance was to get to safety, so I made a split-second decision to head to the nearest police station. I googled the closest one and followed the GPS to it, adrenaline pumping. I raced towards the building, the other car still hot on my heels. As I pulled into the parking lot of the police station, I hit my brakes hard, trying to put some distance between me and my pursuer. I jumped out of the car, heart pounding in my chest. I ran towards the entrance of the station, yelling for help. The police were quick to respond. Before I knew it, they had the other driver in custody. Turns out they had a history of road rage. They had been following me with the intent to cause harm. I let out a shaky breath, grateful to be safe and unharmed. It was a terrifying experience, one that I never want to repeat. But I was thankful for the quick thinking and actions of the police that got me out of harm's way. From now on, I will always be on high alert when I'm out on the road. Back in 2015, I was walking to Target at night before the release of the Nuka-Cola Quantum. I was excited to have one, but I didn't have a ride, and my bike was stolen a few weeks before, so I had to walk. And as I walked down the dark, desolate country road towards the store, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The only sound was the crunch of the gravel underneath my feet and the distant hum of insects in the night. Suddenly, a truck pulled up alongside me. The driver rolled down his window, called out to me, "Hey bud, need a ride?" The dude instantly creeped me out. This man's demeanor set off alarm bells in my mind. I promptly declined, thanking him for his offer and assuring him I was fine walking. But as I continued on my way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the man's truck following behind me at a slow pace, his headlights casting a sinister glow on the darkness. The man began to rev his engine, his truck inching closer and closer to me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I knew I couldn't outpace the vehicle, and therefore there was nowhere to go. There was woods on my right and a ditch on my left. I reached for my phone, ready to dial for help if things took a turn for the worse. The sound of the man's engine grew louder and the headlights illuminated me as he continued to tail me, all the way to the store. I quickened my pace. The store was just up ahead, like a beacon of safety. The man said, "Come on, get in. You must be tired. You can relax and I will get you where you're going, buddy." I kept walking, ignoring him. He kept saying different versions of the same thing, looking at him, and I said, "No, dude, go away." A little later, I finally reached the store, walking up to the small group of people waiting in line, hoping that the man would give up and drive away. He watched me for a while, looking at me and the few people in line. He must have thought it wasn't worth it, because the sound of his engine faded into the night, leaving me shaken but relieved to be out of harm's way. I got my Nuka-Cola Quantum, and then I called a cab to ride home. It was worth the cash to ride in the cab to safety. My new house. As I sat in my new house, alone listening to a chilling horror story narration on YouTube, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Every creak and slam described in the story seemed to echo through the empty room of my new abode, sending shivers down my spine. But then suddenly I heard a loud slam coming from the basement. My heart jumped into my throat as I thought to myself, that wasn't in the video. I slowly made my way down the creaky stairs. My hands trembling, I searched every corner, every nook, every cranny, but nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to brush it off, feeling unease, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. But the unsettling noises continued over the next few days, each one more ominous than the last. Finally, unable to ignore my growing fears, I mustered up the courage to venture back into the basement, and then when I saw it, a figure lurking behind some boxes, their eyes glowing in the darkness from my flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted back up the stairs, slamming the door behind me, fumbling with my phone to call the police. When they arrived, they combed through the house, but found no trace of an intruder. I was left feeling on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder in my own house. Hours later, I sat alone in my dimly lit living room. A loud crash shattered the silence. I followed the sound of the source and discovered a broken window in the basement. I looked around and seen a panel of the wall hanging open. It was a hidden room tucked away behind a false wall Inside of the walls were covered in unsettling symbols, gruesome artifacts, a twisted shrine to an unknown intruder who had been haunting me. My blood ran cold as I realized I was not alone in my new home. All that time, and as I stood there engulfed in fear, I knew I would never truly feel safe here again. Was he still here? Did he leave? I was terrified. I couldn't stay here any longer. I called my parents and moved back home, and I just left that house there to rot. The dark web. I remember the day my friend introduced me to the dark web. He told me all about the illicit activities you could be found there, drugs, weapons, even hitman for hire. At first, I was hesitant, but curious. I agreed to check it out. After a quick tutorial from my friend, I dove headfirst into the dark corners of the internet. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, a whole other world filled with danger and intrigue. I couldn't tear myself away from it, clicking from one shady site to the next. One site was just a pie with a countdown. No idea what that was about. But then I went on a website that was like a chat room, people talking back and forth. Some of it seemed like code, so I typed, "Hey guys, what's all that mean?" The chat grinded to a halt, but then a message popped up, "You are being watched." At first I brushed it off as a prank, but as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I saw shadowy figures in the corner of my eyes, lurking in the darkness wherever I went. One night, as I was walking home, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Before I knew it, I was surrounded by 4 masked individuals. They beat me mercilessly, whispering a chilling tone, "We are always watching," every time they hit me. Ever since that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow, every noise sent shivers down my spine. The dark web may have opened my eyes to a whole new world, but it also brought me face to face with a darkness that I never knew existed. And now I live in constant fear of unseen eyes following me and my every move. This next narration is done by a friend of mine. His YouTube channel is Chad and Drabbits. This story has a air of SA, so if you do not like that kind of thing, please skip this one. But it is a work of fiction, so do not take it literally.
As I drove down the dimly lit streets, my heart raced with excitement and anticipation. I glanced over at the passenger in my back seat, a young girl who was so drunk she could barely keep her eyes open. I couldn't resist the urge that had been building inside me, the need to take advantage of her vulnerable state. I knew it was wrong, but the thrill of the chase was irresistible. I turned off the Uber app and drove away from the location it directed me to. I was planning to take her to a park and S.A. her while she was drunk. I could leave her there, as I was sure she wouldn't remember me. I reached over and took her phone. No one would be able to trace it back to me. I had been trying to resist this urge for a long time. As we approached a red light, I slowed down and came to a stop. Suddenly, the girl's eyes flew open and she bolted out of the car, stumbling onto the pavement. I cursed under my breath and quickly got out of the car, determined to catch her before she could escape. But she was faster than I anticipated, and I struggled to keep up. She ran up to a nearby house and pounded on the door, shouting for help. I could see the fear in her eyes as she desperately tried to get inside. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of the situation. I had to get out of there before anyone caught me. With one last look at the girl, I sprinted back to my car and drove off into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a wake-up call for me, a reminder that my actions have consequences. I vowed never to let my desires get the best of me again.
The Neckbeard. I couldn't contain my excitement. As my girlfriend and I headed to the comic convention, we both dressed as characters from our favorite show, Teen Titans. I dressed as Robin, and she dressed as Raven. We were so thrilled to be surrounded by other fans and immerse ourselves in a world of superheroes. As we wandered the convention floor, taking in all the sights and sounds. I couldn't help but notice a creepy-looking dude following us. He kept staring at my girlfriend and taking photos of her without permission. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe he was just a fan of her costume, but hours had passed. His behavior had become increasingly unsettling. The guy started getting too close, invading our personal space. He would whisper creepy comments about my girlfriend's appearance and touch her without her consent. I tried to confront him, but he just laughed it off and continued to follow us around the convention. This dude was a neckbeard. His pungent, musky smell that lingered in the air, it's like a mixture of body odor and stale beer, with a hint of muskiness. Honestly, every time he walked by, you couldn't help but wrinkle your nose at the stench. Pretty unpleasant, to say the least. As the day went on, the guy's behavior became more and more aggressive. He would corner us in crowded areas, making it difficult for us to escape. He started acting like he owned my girlfriend, like he was some kind of prize for him to win. I felt powerless and frustrated, unable to protect my girlfriend. This creepy stalker, it's not like I could just hit him, so I tried to find security. But every time they looked for him, he would just disappear, only to reappear moments later leering at us from a distance. Eventually, we just left the convention. We made our way back to the parking lot. But as we got close to our car, the guy appeared once again, blocking our path. He smirked at us like he knew he had us trapped. The guy pulled out a box cutter and laughed, so I knew I had to get my girlfriend out of there. So I grabbed her hand, and we ran to the nearest security guard. I explained the situation, and he quickly escorted us to our car, making sure the creepy dude didn't follow us. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The whole experience had been so terrifying and surreal. I never thought a comic convention could turn into a nightmare like that. Hello, and welcome to My Short Scary Stories, Episode 4. But through it all, my girlfriend and I stuck together, supporting each other through the face of danger. And as we drove home, I couldn't help but keep a lookout for the creepy neckbeard. The cemetery. I found a hiding spot behind a large mausoleum, the cold stone offering some comfort from the heat, as I waited for the seeker to find me. But as the minutes ticked by, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I could hear whispering, a voice faint and indirect. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, my breath catching in my throat, as though another voice joined in, and then another. The voices seemed to be coming from all around me, surrounding me in a cacophony of sound. I felt a surge of fear wash over me. As I knew I had to find my friends, I darted out of my hiding spot and made my way to the statue at the center of the cemetery, where we had agreed to regroup. But the voices persisted, growing louder, more insistent. We heard them almost yell, "Run!" We knew we had to get out. We had to escape the haunted cemetery that seemed to be alive with unseen spirits. We ran as fast as we could, our footsteps pounding on the gravel path. As we fled the graveyard, the shadows seemed to be moving and shifting, reaching out like they were trying to grab us. When we finally reached the safety of our friend's house, we realized that we had all been scratched and cut deep, like claw marks gouging into our skin, and they had been made by what looked like fingernails. We were terrified, and we all knew that we had encountered something beyond our understanding in that graveyard. The voices and the shadows haunted us in our dreams, reminding us of the darkness lurking in the night. From that night on, we never talked about our ill-fated game of hide-and-seek, and we never went back to that graveyard, but the scratch marks remained as a haunting reminder of the supernatural terror that we had faced that fateful night. And we knew that we will never be the same. It's closing time at the coffee shop. My coworker Sarah and I are busy cleaning up the last of the tables, getting ready to close for the night. We're chatting about our plans for the weekend, and suddenly the door swings open violently. Sarah's ex-boyfriend is standing there. He yelled something, getting aggressive, and before we knew it, he pulled out a knife and started attacking Sarah. I tried to intervene and ended up getting slashed on my arm in the process. The pain is excruciating, but all I can think about is getting us out of this dangerous situation. Sarah is bleeding badly. I know I need to get help fast. I grab her and lead her towards the back of the shop, where the walk-in cooler is located. As we make our way there, I hear her gasping for breath, her strength fading with each passing moment. I push the door open to the cooler and usher Sarah inside, quickly locking it behind us. I hear her sobs and clutching her wounds. I know we need to stay calm and think of a plan to get us out of here alive. I can hear him yelling outside the door.
You think you can just walk away from me? You think you can just leave me like I'm nothing? Well, you're wrong. I'm not going to let you just walk away unscathed. I'll make sure you feel the pain that you caused me. You'll regret everything you could leave me behind. You'll see what happens when you mess with me. You'll see the kind of monster you created. And when I'm done with you, you'll wish you had never met me. You'll wish you had never crossed me. You'll be sorry you ever thought you could break my heart. So go ahead, walk away all you want, but just know I won't stop until you feel the same pain I feel. And trust me, it's gonna be a lot worse for you.
As we wait in the cold darkness of the cooler, I can't help but feel a surge of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. But I know that I have to stay strong for Sarah to protect her and get her out of this nightmare. It had only felt like a few minutes that we were in the cooler. Then suddenly I heard footsteps approaching the door. I could hear the sounds of keys or something jingling. I held my breath, hoping it was the police come to save us. The door swung open, and I seen the flashing lights of a police car outside and the flashlight of a police officer. He announced himself. Relief washed over me as the officer came rushing in to check on us. They had apprehended Sarah's ex, and a few minutes later, I saw Sarah being taken out on a stretcher, her face pale and her eyes closed. I hoped she was going to be okay, but the image of her laying there, bleeding and hurt, will haunt me for a very long time. As we were taken to the hospital to get treated for our wounds, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive. This next video features a friend of mine. His YouTube channel is Chad and Drabbits. I hope you enjoy it.
I had been casing out the house for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I couldn't resist the allure of the expensive jewelry, electronics, and cash that I knew was inside. One night, I finally made my move. I slipped in through a side window and began rifling through drawers and closets, grabbing whatever valuables I could find. But as I made my way through the house, a chill ran down my spine. Something didn't feel right. I continued my search, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that I was being watched. And that's when I saw it, a trail of blood leading down the hallway. My heart raced as I followed the bloody trail, my mind racing with the possibilities of what I might find at the end. As I turned the corner, my worst fears were realized. There, lying in a pool of blood, was a lifeless body. I stumbled back in shock, my mind reeling with the realization that I had stumbled upon a murder scene. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. Who had done this? More importantly, were they still in the house? I quickly searched for an exit, desperate to get out of the house as quickly as possible. But as I made my way to the front door, a sound stopped me in my tracks. Footsteps. Someone else was in the house. Panic coursed through my veins as I tried to find a place to hide. I ducked behind a couch, my heart pounding in my chest as the footsteps drew nearer. And then, suddenly, they stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. But to my surprise, the footsteps started up again, moving away from me. Relief flooded through me as I realized that I had narrowly escaped a potentially deadly encounter. I waited until I was sure the coast was clear before making my escape, my mind still reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. As I fled into the night, I couldn't shake the image of that lifeless body from my mind. As I left the scene of the crime behind me, I knew that the memory of that night would haunt me forever.
Thank you so much for watching. Hello and welcome to Short Scary Stories, Episode 5. This video will be a little bit different. It's going to be mostly Reddit stories that I got from people on Reddit. This story is from Nostalgic Winters 98 on Reddit on Let's Not Meet. So I'd like to start out with saying thank you for everybody that allowed me to read your stories, and I hope you enjoy. Close Encounter. The year was 1999. I was 11 that fall, and it was summertime. For Christmas, my parents got me this cool blue boombox. It was awesome. I started listening to music on my own and getting CDs from friends. I had to use money that I had earned to buy CDs from Coconuts, which is before FYE. I could be wrong, but that's where we got music at the time. I had brought it with me to my dad's friend's house and put some D batteries in it. We listened to the radio while a bunch of us kids swam and did whatever. My dad's friend Dave lived about 10 minutes away in the country. He had built a house and had an in-ground pool. My dad, he was a drunk, and he got sloppy drunk at this party. And I was good friends with Dave's son Scott. So I talked him into spending the night, and he was on board. Scott was a few years older than me, and he was cool. So he grabbed some CDs, and my dad drove us home blitzed out of his mind. My dad drove a robin's egg blue Chevy pickup at the time, and Scott and I were in the back of the truck with my boombox. It is when I heard Limp Bizkit, Korn, and Godsmack for the first time, because Scott wasn't very interested in my Blink-182 album. So we were driving through the backcountry roads, which are all now developed subdivisions, and there are seldom streetlights anywhere at the time, so it's dark. It's summertime and we are rocking it out to Limp Bizkit. My dad approaches a four-way intersection, which there are no lights anywhere except for our headlights. One car passes us as Scott starts telling me about what light pollution is. There's a factory/plant not far from where we were. We also had no idea my dad had passed out at the stop sign. We sat there as this flash of orange light lit up the whole street, and we looked up and there was this large circular orange light above us. You could make out a V-shaped outline and some smaller yellowish orange lights on the wings. It was high above us at first, maybe 80 feet. At one point I sat there making no noise and the boombox kept playing, and Scott looked at me and said, "Is that an effing UFO?" I yelled, "Woo!" like Ric Flair. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. I never shared the experience like that with anyone, and our screams woke up my dad. He saw the craft as well and peeled out. It kept pace with us for a bit before ascending up and out of sight. We couldn't sleep that night, so we stayed up drinking soda, watching some wrestling, and surfing the web looking at UFOs. My dad asked us about it in the morning, and he asked us what we saw. He told us to keep it to ourselves because he saw something once and he was our age and no one believed him, and it was something that he remembered painful because his brother never let him forget about it. But this was cool, just two friends rocking out, seeing something they can't explain. The Bad Feeling Saved My Life by Responsible Carpet 43. Hello, my name is Christopher. I am a high school student in my first year, so I'm 16 years old. This story took place during the second week of Easter vacation in 2023, when I was 15. I want to mention that it happened at my mother's house. At the time, my mother had decided to renovate the kitchen because it was really outdated. So there was this blonde guy with blue eyes who came to start the work, which involved putting plastic sheets on the walls and dividing in the living room, which is next to the kitchen. At the end of the day, I had to go pick up a dental impression, and my mother had informed the worker that we'd be back in an hour and a half. However, since the appointment was just to pick up an item, we returned only 45 minutes later. On our way back, my mother suggested we pick up kebabs and do a good deed by dropping the worker off at the train station. When I returned to offer him a ride to the station, I noticed he was very uneasy and smiling nervously, as if to say everything was fine. I insisted that he come with us, and he agreed. Along the way, he explained that his name was Brian. I'm changing his name for anonymity. And that he was originally from Moldova, and he mentioned that he lived alone in Paris, but had 2 children living in his house in the country. We arrived at the station and dropped him off, grabbing our kebabs, and went home. After finishing eating, I decided to take a bath, as I love doing this all the time. However, this time to my dismay, the water turned from hot to cold. So I spent 2 hours in lukewarm water, got out and returned upstairs to my room. Immediately upon opening the door, I noticed that my PC was open and turned on to my lock screen's wallpaper, even though I distinctly remember closing it down before going downstairs for my bath. I asked my mom if she had been in my room or touched my PC, and she said no, that she had stayed in her room watching the news. After a quick search of my room turned up nothing, I decided to finally go to sleep at 5 a.m. I woke up sweating and shivering intensely, which had never happened to me before. I had a feeling of danger and that there was something or someone nearby. So I grabbed a knife because yes, it's a bit scary, but I have a passion for edged weapons, probably from manga, and I have a collection of knives, katanas, and shurikens on my walls of my bedroom. So with the knife, I searched my room again, but found nothing. However, the feeling didn't go away, so I locked my door and messaged my mother to see if she had the same feeling, but she didn't respond. I waited 3 hours until I heard her walking in her room. She came to see me, and I explained what had happened that night. She told me I was probably just being paranoid and that everything was fine. She also warned me that Brian would be arriving at 10 a.m. to continue work on the house. Since she would be leaving for work, I would be alone with him, and she told me that I wouldn't need to go downstairs to let him in, because she told him she kept the key in the woodshed next to the house. She then went to work, and I went back to sleep, locking my door. I woke up at 11:30 and went downstairs to make food in the basement, because the kitchen was under construction, and I didn't find Brian there. I didn't think much of it. I went back upstairs and I ran into him. As soon as I saw him, that bad feeling returned, and he started talking to me. I tried to end the conversation quickly and went back to my room and locked the door. 10 minutes later, Brian knocked on my door asking for help carrying something. I didn't respond because I really didn't want to see him again. He started trying to open my door, and he began kicking it hard. So my first instinct was to grab a knife and lock myself in my bathroom, which is in my room, and I called the police. I explained in a panic that what was happening to the woman on the line, and she said she was sending 2 cars which would arrive in about 10 minutes. While waiting, Brian managed to enter my room and began breaking down the bathroom door. I told him I had called the police, and then they would be arriving any minute. I was armed with a knife, and that I wouldn't hesitate to use it. Upon hearing this, he had stopped banging on the door and left. The police arrived and caught Brian as he was trying to flee. My mother immediately came home and saw me and burst into tears, telling me she should have listened to me. A few days later, the police called to explain that Brian was wanted for kidnapping, identity theft, torture, and murder. I believe that bad feeling I had during the night was him returning and hiding outside my room in the house because he knew where the spare key was hidden. But now he's in prison, and I hope I never see him again. I am also thankful for my weird passion for knives, because I don't know if Brian would have left if I hadn't mentioned it, and especially thanks to the police who arrived so quickly and caught him. Weird Hunters by the Amazing Weeb on Creepy Encounters on Reddit. I don't know if this is weird enough, but I thought I'd try anyways. I'm at my parents' house for the summer. All the lights were off, and the cars were missing from the driveway, despite 4 people in the house. It's 7:30 in the night. It's raining. A black truck pulls up in the driveway. A young guy in normal clothes, black hoodie and sweatpants, knocks on the door. My little sister 8 answers the door, with our big dog barking upstairs. They ask 3 things. Are your parents home? Can we hunt the deer that are on your property? Do your parents want to go hunting with us? She says yes, our parents are home, and goes and gets our dad. The weird thing is that there are no deer even on our land. It's not even deer season. My dad comes down to talk to them, and they switch up their story. Now they're saying that they want to hunt wild turkeys on our property. We do have turkeys sometimes wandering around our property, but not today. They told their dad about all the guns they had in their truck, and that there were many that told them they could come from Alabama to hunt here. They asked us if they could hunt on what's clearly our neighbor's property, but my dad sent them away. They drove past our house a couple more times after that. I don't know if this is that strange in New England, but where I come from it definitely is. Also, it could just be my theater mind being overly dramatic, like it always is. But I thought I might give it a shot. In worst case, I read a cool horror story based off this encounter later. Armed Men Outside My Door by Cloud Pleaser on Let's Not Meet on Reddit. I've been a long-time reader of this subreddit, and honestly, it's kind of surreal that I find myself writing about an experience that happened very recently. It was Friday night, and I had gone to bed early, as I had work on Saturday morning. After reading in bed for a bit, I drifted off around 10:30 p.m., only to wake up to a loud scream an hour later, and people yelling profanities. I thought my girlfriend was watching a movie with the volume way up. I went out into the living room to ask her to turn it down a little. Instead, the TV was off and my girlfriend was staring at the front door with her eyes wide. Our apartment was on the ground floor of the building, so our front door opens directly into the main lobby of the building. The voices in question were coming directly from the lobby. I can't make out specifics. In my defense, I was half asleep, and the language in our country I live is not my first language. But there was a lot of swearing involved. My first thought was some kind of domestic dispute, but after listening, I realized it was a group of men that sounded extremely aggravated. I looked at the WhatsApp group chat from my apartment building, and to my horror I saw a message from one of them that said that there were armed men in the building, and that we should not leave our flats. The country I live in has made a major uptick in crime, and I'd heard stories of groups of armed men robbing entire apartment blocks. This seemed fairly apocalyptical to me. However, my first thoughts that these men were going to kick down our door and rob us. One of our dogs started to growl at the commotion outside. I shushed him, and thankfully he obeyed. I heard a commotion in the apartment above me, and went out to the patio to see what was happening. I heard what sounded like large pieces of furniture being knocked over, and a woman and her child screaming. At this point I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that by now they would have robbed us already, if that's what they had planned to do. My girlfriend and I decided to hide in the small shed at the end of our patio, monitoring the group chat on the phone. Our biggest dog silently stood watch outside the door of the shed, his eyes locked on the sliding door at the end of the patio. I would later find our smallest dog cowering between the washing machine and the dryer. After an extremely tense 10 minutes, I heard the screeching of tires. Eventually, someone in the group chat said that the police had arrived. Breathing a huge sigh of relief, I came out of hiding and opened the front door. Alarmingly, on the floor of the lobby were zip ties that had been cut off the security guard. He was talking to one of the tenants. The man was bleeding from a large gash on his face and looked extremely shaken up. Over the next few hours, the story would unfold. The man with the gash on his face was a tenant from upstairs apartment, the one that I had heard the commotion coming from. He was the owner of an import-export business, and for whatever reason he had a sizable sum of money in cash hidden in his apartment. Someone had obviously found out about it and planned the robbery that woke me from my sleep on that Friday night. A group of 8 men had followed him into the apartment's garage and ambushed him when he got out of his car. Judging from the gash on his face, they had roughed him up quite a bit. Some of the group of 8 had gone to the library to surprise the security guard and zip-tie him. The remainder of the group had gone up to the apartment and robbed it, and then fled the scene. It's quite chilling to think that armed men were just meters away from my front door. So, to the men that stormed into my apartment building and broke into my neighbor's house and stole all his cash, let's not meet. Crazy Lady tried calling CPS by Banana Slippery Sticks on Creepy Encounters on Reddit. This isn't really creepy, but it's scary for sure. No, I'm not the parent in this situation, but rather the kid. This was, who knows, years ago. I was young, maybe like 7 or 8. 7, I think. I was with my 2 siblings, my little brother and my older sister. We were all about 3 years apart. Anyways, we were all in the car waiting for our mom, who had gone into a Pizza Delight to pick up our food, which she had pre-ordered beforehand. This was in Briars Lake, I think. We were only alone in there for like a minute, and I was tired, so I was half asleep against the window. I abruptly woke up to an aggressive and loud banging on the car window. My sister, maybe 10 at the time, was sitting shotgun, and I was in the back seat, diagonal from her, and my little brother, probably 4 at the time, was beside me. We all immediately looked where the sound had come from, and saw a 40 or 50-year-old lady. I don't know much about her, and it was late, but her hair was like really fuzzy, thin and crazy looking. It was silvery blonde, but she had this receding hairline and was sweating profusely. She was a little on the heavy side, and her face was practically pressed up against the glass, and she had this insane look on her face. She held her phone up against the window, my sister's window, with the white emergency dial screen up, and yelled something at us. I can't remember what. My mom was literally walking back to the car when this was happening. It was like, WTF. So she immediately gets in the car, and the woman runs around to the door and grabs it, yelling at her about she's a terrible person for leaving her kids alone in the car, and that she was gonna call CPS. Our mom explained to her that she was only gone for 5 minutes max, and that she had a 10-year-old in the car with a phone. The lady kept screaming at my mom, though, and grabbed my mom's wrist. So my mom, who is in the military, immediately rips her hand off of her wrist and slams her door, rolls down the window and gives her the bird, and then books it. The woman was screaming the whole time, looking genuinely insane and terrifying. We later dubbed her Pizza Karen around 2020 when we were reminiscing about the events. And we laugh about it now. But yeah, that's my story. I hope it temporarily filled the boredom. Thank you to Wanderer with Lust from Reddit, Let's Not Meet, for this story. Creepy grandpa locked me in his house while I was hitchhiking. First of all, this is my worst hitchhiking experience. The incident was sketchy AF, but still wouldn't give up my love for hitchhiking. I am a 21-year-old, 20 at the time, man from Finland. Anyways, let's get to the story. This happened the 2nd of December of last year. In Kalamita, Greece. I'd been hitchhiking for quite a while at this point, and I started from Budapest, and had hitchhiked through 7 different countries with only positive outcomes. The story begins around 11 a.m. on Saturday, some hours before I had woken up in a hammock hung up behind the castle ruins in the only place that had trees that weren't someone's olive trees. I was tired from the lack of sleep caused by the cold night and early wake up by the noises of busy markets across the street. After a quick tour of the town and some breakfast, it was time for some hitchhiking. I had made a sign with the words Athens and Sparta in Greek. I was standing by the road leading to the roundabout, where the first exit goes toward Areople, the second towards Sparta, and the third towards Athens. A lot of cars drove by, but nearly all of them took the first exit. It took at least an hour for the first car to stop. It was a small, quaint, old, worn-out white car, driven by an old guy, around 60s. He looked a little dirty, greasy hair, some teeth missing, and a big nose filled with visible blackheads. He didn't really speak English, but I could understand that he was going to Sparta. I was a bit frustrated by the fact that pretty much all of the cars were heading towards Aparioli, so I thought this might be my only chance to jump in. Trying to have a conversation without a shred of language isn't really possible. We introduced ourselves and tried to explain where I was from. He smokes and offers me a cigarette too, but I refused. He drove just shy of 6 kilometers before the guy suddenly makes a left turn and we end up in his yard. He stops the car and gets up and signals me to follow him. So I do. I take my bags and I feel a bit confused. It's a small house in the mountains, surrounded by sheep and olive trees. There's a dog sleeping in the sun, but it doesn't seem to be bothered by us at all. We walk up to this balcony or terrace surrounding his house, and I put my bags inside of his house and join him sitting on the balcony. He lights up another cigarette and asks if I want to eat something or maybe take a shower. I refuse with the help of Google Translate. I ask why aren't we going to Sparta. He answers that I can sleep at his house and he'll drive me there tomorrow. I try to explain that I would like to get to Sparta or even Athens today, so staying at his place isn't really an option. I'm pointing out that there's not many cars going past his house, one like every 15 minutes, and only 4 to 5 hours of daylight left, so every minute is valuable to me. He doesn't really seem to understand, so I get up and walk through the door and grab my bags. I put my backpack on and pick up my other bag. I turn around to see him inside. I try to walk out, but he stops me and guides me to the side, locks the door and turns to me. At that moment, I'm not panicking or anything because I assume that this is a form of hospitality, and it's just doing this jokingly to offer me some food. I keep saying no to him, but he doesn't care. No, now he is standing right in front of me, and I'm starting to feel very disturbed by the presence. For some reason, I keep staring at his blackhead-filled nose. The image still haunts me. He then opens his mouth and raises his hand in a loose fist in order to show me the sign for oral. I'm still saying no to him. He suddenly grabs me by the crotch, and I can feel a cold tingling sensation shiver through my body. As my hairs stood on end, I keep saying no, and I start to raise my fists in order to hit him. We stood like this for a couple seconds, and thank God he let go. I'm still feeling the urge to hit him, but I don't. He asks, "No sex?" I almost shout no at him in a tone that makes it sound like that I'm questioning the question itself. He opens up the door, and I'm free. I walk out, feeling so freaking creeped out by this experience. I walk past the dog to the road and see 2 pickup trucks on the other side of the road. The trucks are surrounded by a group of hunters carrying shotguns on their shoulders. This makes me instantly feel a lot safer. I keep walking by the road for a while before a car passes me by. It's quite warm and I'm in the middle of nowhere, so I empty one of my water bottles and turn it upside down, showing to the cars passing by so they would think that I'm out of water. This works, and a second car stops. I get to Sparta, and later that day, Athens, safely. But I felt disgusted until I got to take a shower. All the kindness I had experienced while hitchhiking before this event had made me too comfortable, and I'd let my guard down. I think humans are good-natured, but probably trusting every stranger is a stretch. Please be safe out there if you're hitchhiking. Creep in the Woods by Bossy Smurf on Creepy Encounters on Reddit. This happened last summer when I, female 18, was 17, went out with a friend, female 19, at the time 18, for a stroll in the woods. We lived near a big forest. So, when leaving the forest, I kind of noticed that something was off. I turned back and there was this really tall guy standing right behind me, only leaving a small gap between me and him. He looked very pale, had light blue shorts on with white stripes and a very dirty white top. He had pretty big, dark eye bags, brownish white hair, and looked like he was in his mid-20s. I instinctively took a step back, and my friend out of panic did the same. The guy stood still and asked if we were interested in being intimate, or if we were lesbians, and that he would have some nice friends at his place. My friend, thank God, told him friendly that we weren't interested in that. The creep turned back without saying anything and left the way we took to get out of the woods and walked back in. We took a different way to get home because we were both creeped out. I told my older sister when I got home that her face turned pale white when I was telling her. She asked me some questions about the guy and told me that this guy sounded like her stalker from high school. Apparently the guy lived in the little village that was near the woods. To this day, I'm way too scared to go into the woods, even if I'm with my friends. I just hope that I'm never going to see that guy again in my life. Guy jumped in front of my car by Appropriate Nebula 500 on Reddit Creepy Encounters. This happened a couple of weeks ago. So I was heading home from my friend's house one night, around 11:30 p.m. My friend lives about 25 minutes from me, and the fastest way to get home is to take a back road. I live in a small rural town. Anyways, I'm driving home with one other car about 4 car lengths in front of me. I'm about 5 minutes from my house when I see a car's taillights suddenly break, and then the car speeds off and turns off a road where I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't think too much about it. Maybe a raccoon ran out in front of them and they didn't want to hit it. As I got to the part of the road where the car slammed on its brakes, a big man, probably 6 feet tall, in a black hoodie jumps in front of my car, flailing his arms and yelling at me. I swerve to the right to not hit him, and I look in my rearview mirror and he's gone. The road had houses, but where the man was, there were none. No street lights, no broken down cars, no nothing. I raced home and called my husband, who was about 2.5 hours away, at an event. He wouldn't be home until after midnight. I told him what happened and how he just disappeared. I was terrified to get out of my car and walk into our house. He stayed on the phone with me till I got inside and immediately headed home. There had been a lot of weird break-ins around my area lately too, and people were trying to steal cars and stuff. I couldn't even imagine what would happen if I stopped my car, not that I would ever. I've seen too many true crime docs. I avoid taking that way home now, and if I do, that's all I can think about is that man. I Viewed the Property of a Murderer by Fox Mulder. On Reddit, Creepy Encounters. When I had finished uni, I'd moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on a website called Spare Room. That's when I was contacted by James, the man who had the room for rent on the outskirts of town that I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me in to view it. We had a chat one evening, and it turned out we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming. And we were both movie buffs, so by the end of the call it felt like chatting with an old friend, and I was looking forward to the meeting. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed he was in his 20s like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he'd been wearing a hairpiece. If he had told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I already decided I didn't want to rent the room from him. I wanted to live with people who were similar age to me, and I put off by the fact that the decor of the house, which looked like it hadn't been changed since the early 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a game console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving out to London for work. Coincidentally, my name is Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother that lived next door. He started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said that I had some other properties to view, but I'd be in touch. I then made an excuse to leave. Everything about him screamed red flag. I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I got back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was and tell her I would absolutely not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask what I thought about moving in. I lied and said I found somewhere else, closer to town, and I did eventually find something with some other young professionals, which turned out to be very great. Some months later, our town was shocked by the news that a man's body had been found in the field on the outskirts of town. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much about it until I found out that the murder suspect was his landlord, James. The same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news, and I got an instant chill. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. I hope you all enjoyed this mega mix. It was my first one that I did, and if I messed up, I'm sorry. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. And don't shoot the messenger.